say,
Recording in progress. That's what I'm supposed to say. It just told me that.
okay.
All right, well, everybody, I think we'll get started. We know we'll have latecomers, but that's okay.
Mhm.
And you should be seen.
So anyway, if we welcome you back to We Have a Dream, a world without racism. It seems like it's been forever, so I guess we're not allowed to take off a month anymore. But we thank you for joining us tonight. And please remember that we are recording. And first, we'd like to thank God that Father finished his radiation treatments today.
Oh,
Oh, okay. Well,
And
that's
now,
good.
if you'll please mute yourselves, we're going to ask Father to bless us with prayer.
Leave ourselves.
So as the ones who have been blessed by God with being a part of this great mystery, let us pray. God, you continually call to us. We acknowledge how powerful and commanding your voice can be in the moment of our intense listening. We also acknowledge with regret that so often, too often, it retains its strength in our hearts and thereby in our lives for far too short a time. So short that the time necessary for your voice to create something new in us and in our world passes away, undone. Sadly, all that remains is the mere echo of your voice. Sometimes your voice is heard in the urgent events that demand our attention and then our work for justice. One of those events bearing your voice was the murder of George Floyd. This powerful event drew all of us together, and many months have passed since. During this time, we've listened and studied, reflected and discerned. Our humble prayer tonight is simply this: may the passing of time not have meant the passing of the depth of our compassion, effort, or commitment necessary so the kingdom you seek might come forth. Your kingdom, where race ceases to be a source of division and diminishment and becomes the cause for joy and enrichment. May the justice you seek and our efforts to respond justly to you guide our time together tonight. May Jesus and his gospel be our trusted companion and guide, not only tonight, but always and forever, to which we all say, Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Father. So during May and June, we explored the hidden biases that we all have because we have a brain. We make automatic associations, even if they are contrary to what we believe or desire. Historically, Black individuals have been disadvantaged because of overt intentional racism and unconscious biases. We also learned that our biases unknowingly seeped into media platforms and artificial intelligence, which perpetuates existing disparities. So we thank you again, Jody, for your outstanding presentation. And you are a gift, and not just to me, but to all of us. So thank you. So hopefully since then you have become aware of some of your own biases and made an effort to overcome them. Tonight we'll take your pulse on that and discuss your feedback on the acknowledgement letter. We'll discuss the Racial Equity Fund itself and also hear from Joe Cronin on the subcommittee's work on how we might use our Racial Equity Fund. So I think we'll have one or two people share what you've noticed about your own bias. For example, Father's prayer was perfect for me because I'm concerned about my comfort bias. It's too easy to find excuses not to take action. And I'm afraid that this moment in time is our only shot if history is any indication.
You want?
because after Freddie Gray, I was sure that things would change. And then after mass shootings, I thought surely we would ban many guns. And then, of course, after George Floyd, I was sure that racism would really take a hit. And some of us did wake up, but not enough. So injustices surface, and if we relax into complacency, nothing will change. So what about you? Did anyone recognize your own bias or how you were radicalized on Facebook when being paired with others that think like you do? Do we have any volunteers? You can unmute yourselves if you want to speak, and you can also use your little yellow hand.
Little hand.
Nobody had any biases? I find that hard to believe. Father? Go ahead, Father.
Unmute, Father. Unmute.
There we go. I was just saying I do have them. I wasn't going to admit all of them to you. I think for me, what has happened is the old biases are still there, because I think, as Jody was saying, they're in my brain. Those connections are already there. But what has happened is I have become aware of them as soon as they hit. The one difficulty I have with that is I feel shame. And I think I have to learn how to get beyond the shame at something that was rooted in my brain for lots of different reasons. Because that shame only diminishes rather than helps me to understand that this in me is also in others. And if I can learn how to let go of the shame associated with those old images and those old perspectives just automatically surfacing, it might help other people to be able to let go of the shame, because shame paralyzes. Okay, it just does, and it continues to focus on what's wrong rather than that I'm in a position and I don't respond based on those old images that just automatically come to mind. So that's been a somewhat painful process, but I think an important one.
I guess as a normal course of business, as I'm, going through the day, through the week, I inevitably, categorize people, and, categorize people, and not necessarily negatively, but sometimes. And, black and white is the most simple category, for sure. And, yesterday I found myself in a line while I was renting a truck, and the woman in front of me was a Black woman who had bedroom slippers on as she was renting a car. And, I find bedroom slippers, out in normal, daily life to be, kind of different. And I have a negative valuation that I put on it, which then I associate with race. And I'd say, it's race, it's class, it's a variety of other things that people might or might not consider to be acceptable in public. So, trying to, keep uh, those kinds of categorizations, under control is one thing. So that was yesterday. Today, and some of the folks on the Zoom here were with me today over at City Springs, and we saw strong Black women who were just dynamos and who were, training us on working with kids and stuff. And I mean, first of all, I love these women, I know them, but beyond that, I find when I'm in an atmosphere where, I'm with strong Black women, doing something for the kids, that the categorizations fall apart. I don't think of categories in that situation because that's the environment that I'm dropping into rather than something that I'm thinking that I would be in control of. And I find that to be really helpful and wonderful. And so a lot of it is environment that, we participate in or, again, think we control, something like that. So that's my contribution.
Very valuable one too, Joe. Thank you. I share that same bias. So we have many things. Sure,
Jody,
Jody,
you're
Unmute.
muted.
you're muted.
Of course I am. I just wanted to respond actually to both of those because of reason that I did do all that implicit bias work. First of all, Father, that was kind of the main thing, that recognizing that it's so unconscious and it's the way the culture around us is helpful to take away the shame. And I think the fact that you are reflecting, and as Joe was saying, I mean, just the fact that recognizing that, wow, there's all these powerful Black women that I'm seeing. I mean, to me, that's the value of that consciousness and redirecting what our automatics are. And so I'm psyched actually that you both brought up those two examples. Thank you.
Okay. We have,
I've got one thing to say, that if
of course, Sharon.
I find that I must work with looking at people who are not people of color and not automatically or trying to automatically putting them in the MAGA group. It's a reflection of someone who's in a marginalized group looking at the dominant group and automatically or too automatically assuming that you're one of the 74 million. And I find that I have to work on. I have to just pull back my initial thoughts. I'm looking for, once again, like you said, the house shoes. So I'm looking for the good old boy or the good old girl look, and automatically attaching that to a group that I certainly don't support and believe in, but it's something that I have to do. I have to make myself think, hold on, and proceed further, and then have something to think about rather than automatically to make an assumption. And I have to work on that every day.
Wow.
I share that one too.
Thank you.
And we're all, I think, conscious now of what the assumptions we make or the perceptions that we have. I had a couple of interesting experiences. I think it was last night. I'm sorry that Selwyn and Trinesh are not on, because I feel bad mentioning them when they're not with us. But But last night, Selwyn came to drop something off to me. And we're standing at the doorway and he had his car running. And I noticed he kept being distracted. He was watching a young Black man walking in front of the house.
Mm.
And he kept watching him and watching him. And I knew he was watching him, and I knew why he was watching him. And after the young man passed, Selwyn looked at me and he said, "You knew I was watching him." And I said, "Yes." And he said, I wasn't racist. And we both looked at each other and said, "Yeah, you were." And so we all are doing it. The flip side of it is that I was on Facebook late last night, and a cousin of mine, a daughter of a cousin of mine, who I think is in that MAGA group, Sharon, I'm pretty sure. And she put up a post about appreciating Etta James. And she put the music up, and she put a cover, an old record cover of Etta James up, but it was a cover of Etta James looking very white with blonde hair.
Mm.
So I actually sent a pretty snarky response. And I then thought to myself, that wasn't very helpful at all. So I think we are, I think I said something like, I saw Etta James in New York when I was very young. And I said, "Do you know that she is African-American?" And she never actually directly responded to me. She just told me how much she loved the song. But so I think we're in this whirlwind of both sides of this, right?
Mhm.
And as it turns out, last night, there was an armed robbery carjacking 2 blocks away. So, it is so hard to figure out that balance of not automatically making assumptions on either side, and yet needing to be aware of your surroundings, especially, in places where we live. It's a struggle.
I want to thank you all for those very genuine and candid remarks. And I would agree that we could all see some of ourselves in what everyone said. We have many things to cover tonight. They are all important. So to be sure we cover the whole agenda, Mary Ann has generously agreed to act as a timer to keep us on track so that we can cover all the topics. The first is a very important one. It's your feedback on the draft letter of acknowledgement that you were sent. And I'm going to turn that over to you, Peggy, because you've been working so hard on it.
All right, so in the email that I sent yesterday, I reminded you about the feedback and asked for input and asked you to be ready for tonight. So are we going to send it? Where are we going to send it? How do we want to rewrite parts of it? What do we want? And we also asked for ideas on the banner on the side of the church. So we heard from Jack, Kathy, and Joe McNeely, which is really hard to believe for this group, considering the creativity. I was very surprised. We only heard from 3, but I thank you very much, Jack, Kathy, and Joe. And we incorporated most of the suggestions, and we actually made one change today. So I'm going to bring up the letter so you can see how it stands now. So we're asking the rest of you, and also the 3 of you, if you want to add anything, what changes would you recommend? So let's deal with that first, and then we'll discuss what we should do with it. So you'll need to unmute yourselves if you want to.
I don't recommend any changes. I guess that's why I didn't respond, but I like the revised letter.
Okay, I am putting it up now.
While you, oops.
Go ahead, Skip.
Father, I saw your yellow hand is up. Did
Oh,
you
yeah.
want to say something while we're putting that together?
Yeah, I did. And I apologize that I didn't get back to you, Peggy. Life has been rather odd for the last 8 weeks. And I'm behind on lots of things, not just this.
Yes.
The one question I had in terms of acknowledgement, is there any significance to acknowledge what actually has also been accomplished? As I read it, and again, reading anything, it always is dependent upon the time, the mindset you have at the time you're reading it. But it came, the reading the acknowledgement, I was aching to hear what we have in fact done, that there have been things that have been accomplished. And is there some importance to including the fact that it isn't only a racist history? There have been those in the white community who have worked hand in hand with the African American community and have played an important role in the undermining or the effort to undermine racism and the direct impact it has on people's lives. So that was a piece that surfaced in me, and I'm certainly open to hearing, people's thoughts about whether that makes any sense or not.
I would like to hear from the African Americans in the group first. How would you feel?
Peggy, I just want to say, I noticed that you didn't include the things that the effort we made in inclusive housing, I think was one of the efforts the church made.
So you're,
And when you had, it's down further below this in the letter, in a section where it says work done or something. I don't know if you can.
yeah, can we get to that part in a minute, Dennis? First, I would like to hear, do you agree that, and I don't think, Father, you were just talking about our church. You were talking about, are you talking about just our church?
No, much broader than that. So for instance, the civil rights workers that were murdered, that played a pivotal role in, so there have been people that have seen the terrible injustice of racism and have joined the African American community in profound efforts to try to change that reality in our society. So, and again, it could be I'm just reading it in such a way that it sounded to me as if we've done nothing,
But we haven't done enough.
Well, that is clear, and I think that is said very clearly in
And I'm not in favor of talking about what has been accomplished. With my age, I remember the civil rights movement as Now TV. It was the nightly news, and I acknowledge. But my problem is when you're trying, when you acknowledge the good, most people then skittle over there and they get comfortable with what has been done, what has been accomplished. And if you're looking at the, if I had to look at, be frank, if I had to look at the Catholic Church of today and see its leadership role as compared to what was meant, as what was stated in the early part of this letter, it's lacking, and I'm being courteous.
I'd like to weigh in too. I guess I have two reactions. Sharon, I agree with you mostly, because I think, Father, for every forward step historically that we've taken, there's been a backlash.
Mhm.
After the Civil War, there was, all those years of backlash during Jim Crow. After the Civil Rights Movement, there's a backlash in terms of there never was integration of schools. There's been a real resegregation if you think about it. Um, there's there's also been a kind of complacency. Well, you've got some of what you wanted, you know, you're emancipated and you can do, but the real truth is all the stuff we've been talking about, the systemic and structural racism that perpetuates no progress. Then my other reaction is I sort of viewed the letter as going to confession. And so when I'm going to confession, I'm really striking my chest more than I'm saying, well, I've done some good things. And, that's not what I'm focusing on. So I kind of feel, well, Sharon, I think you said it best in a sense. When we say the good things, people who feel uncomfortable rush to those things as a way out.
Could I offer a suggestion?
Mhm.
Skip,
Sure. I mean,
I
that's my
Sure.
I really, really like you characterizing this as a confession. That changes the whole tenor in my own mind. So I would even suggest that that section that says acknowledgement, I would suggest changing that to confession.
Other team members, this is open discussion here.
Yeah. And
Thank you for that.
I just want to make sure, Dennis, I haven't forgotten your comment. Are you okay?
Okay,
Wait till we get down there?
sure. Go ahead.
Thanks.
I had thought very much of the confession idea. Whether we use that in the wording, I don't know whether that would depend on to whom this was addressed. Would it make a difference? I love the idea of we confess that we have not done this. Would that resonate with the Baltimore Sun, for example? Again, that later question about to whom are we sending this and does that make a difference? But I think acknowledgement is, that section is confession, and therefore what we've done well doesn't belong in that section if we were going to talk about it at all.
Mm, mm,
And I would just kind of affirm Skip and Sharon so much. We are in right now the strongest retrograde in terms of voting rights since the Reconstruction and what happened after Reconstruction. So that's going on, all these Republican places with their 320 some bills to restrict voting. Okay, so we've gone back and we are going back right now. So I would stay away from acknowledging anything,
Well, there is the statement about St. Vincent de Paul has been active in racial justice, and that may suffice.
mm.
Yeah, I agree.
From my point of view, I think we have to figure out what the most important thing is in this letter. And it seems to me that it shouldn't be about us, and focusing on us. It should be what's going to happen next. What are we going to do, and how do we hope to make a difference? And that gets away from what some of our reading, let's call it the idea of white fragility, that somehow we have to always be careful about accepting any blame or anything like that, being able to accept, for example, in this case, having something to confess. But I want to get past that. And, so what are we going to do is more the issue for me. And that's the most important thing in the letter. The other things are maybe preambles to where we want to go.
And I forgot to point out the sentence that is different than the one you got in the email. So it's the last acknowledgement. And we acknowledge that white members of our parish continue to benefit from those systems and practices of privilege. So we changed that a little based on feedback. Sorry, I had forgotten to point that out. So Tom, I need a sense of, do we need to go through this?
I
Or-
would say that I prefer acknowledge rather than confess. I think it works well in here.
Okay.
I agree with Mary there because especially because it's not, we're also talking about the past. So we can't confess for the sins of others. I'm sorry. So, but we can.
That's her dog.
Very sorry, it was the dog bowl. But we can acknowledge that we know this is in our history. And I really agree with everything else that's been said. The only other thing is, and this goes maybe to Dennis's point, actually, as we get down to, and a little bit of Joe, yes, it's not about us, but I think putting some examples in of what we've done or what we plan to do helps to model some practices for others if this is going out publicly. And the only thing that I want to say, and this goes to Dennis, I'm trying to see where you are, Peggy, in terms of what we've done.
I wasn't flipping to the end yet, but if everybody wants to go to the end, just was there?
Well, just not to forget.
Well, the ending that Dennis is talking about is our work.
Right. And I just felt that when we talked about ministries of food, clothing, and support, it doesn't get to the structural issues. It's the charity part. So I think Dennis's point and what I would add here is something about our work on following legislation. Right. And those structural changes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Dennis, since we're down here now, would you like to comment more on that?
No, just that it should be included, I think, as part of the work that we've done in as a parish. Mostly it was initiated by Father Lawrence. And so I think Maureen Daly worked on it also.
You're talking about the housing.
The housing, yeah.
Are you talking about the tenements that were torn down, with Barbara Mikulski and that, or which piece of the housing are you talking about? The recent legislation?
Well, there was legislation that was, I'm not sure how long ago it was, but it's not too recent, but it was done some years ago.
I think you're probably talking about the work that he did with Barbara Mikulski to get the high rise torn down. Is that?
No,
That's
no.
not, okay. So
To get any new real estate companies that created housing, to include
Oh,
low-income housing
Mixed socioeconomic.
in their building of it,
Yeah, affordable.
affordable housing.
yeah, affordable. Okay.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
don't know
and
any,
that just happened. I mean, they've been working on that for a couple of years, particularly our lawyer from the parish. He's been involved with that, and they're still working on it. And beyond the boundaries that Dick was involved with, 3 or 4 of the parishioners are still involved with Beyond the Boundaries, which is for inclusionary housing. So we are working on the legislation, and we did get Maryland to, accept vouchers and all that just last year.
You may
Can
also
we,
want to
um,
reference
can-
bridge as
I
well.
don't know how to, with this thing up on the screen, how do you decide, how do you find out if you can say something?
Well, there you go.
so,
I keep pushing the raise my hand button, but it just keeps disappearing.
we can hear you.
Okay.
All right.
You do
So
have
can-
somebody
can
with a
someone-
hand raised.
As we get into this, I'm a little lost about if someone could summarize for me again the audience and purpose of writing this letter. Because I hear us saying all kinds of things, but I'm not sure, it's a communication piece. So if someone could summarize to whom this is being addressed and for what outcome that we want.
So I think that to whom we haven't decided yet. But initially, when we talked about reparations, in almost everything that at least I've read and that Skip and I have talked about, is that part of reparations includes acknowledgement. And the other piece is funding to try to bring racial equity. So I guess our whole purpose was to have this as kind of the acknowledgement piece, and just also to make people aware of the fund that we want to do the work that we feel we're called to do for racial equity. Skip, did you want to weigh in on?
Sure, I think that that's a very critical question too, Joe. And maybe we all need to make sure we're seeing it the same way. For me, I thought we were making an acknowledgement to the Baltimore community of which we are part. And so to that extent, that's why we were thinking about, do you put it in the newspaper? How do we make sure the Archdiocese gets it? The African-American community sees it. So it was our acknowledgement to our fellow Baltimore community citizens. That's how I saw it.
Yeah. And I think just in case Jerry wanted to talk, Jerry DeLama, I think you've had your. So I don't- if you're. Joe's.
Could we get another could we all get a copy of the latest version now of the letter? I can't read on screens very well. And if we could get it, like maybe in our email, we could all look at it again and maybe make comments on it and send it back to you, Peggy. And
So Jerry, the only sentence we changed was that one that I read. Everything else is the same as the one you got yesterday.
okay, but I couldn't find it in the email. It must be me. I don't know.
Okay, I can
I
send
had
it.
the email and for some reason I couldn't find it. And
It's, if you have the email that had the Zoom link, it was on the same one.
right. So is it like a large?
It was a PDF.
It's an attachment at the top.
An
right?
attachment at the top.
Oh, okay. So you download that. Okay.
Right.
All right. So,
And we did change one sentence,
okay.
which, and I enlarged that because I was told by text that it was hard to read. So, but if I
Right.
shrink it again, if it's too confusing.
I mean, can we take time to make it? Do we have to make the decision today about what to write? And
No,
No, we don't have to do anything. I mean, as a team, that's why we're trying to move forward, and we really want consensus. So no, we don't have to press for anything tonight.
Okay.
Only because when we sent it out in June, we thought, oh, people would have a couple months. And so we thought that time period would be good, that we wouldn't have to do it on a Zoom. But we don't have to finalize it now. We just figured people were getting antsy. Serafina, I think you were next.
Only, yeah, just quickly, I think Joe McNeely's point is really well taken, and I agree that, you know, what you say and how you say it really has to do with your audience.
Mhm.
So if you're saying, well, really what we were thinking behind this was it should go into the Baltimore Sun, for example, that change, you know, that may determine what you say and how you say it.
Mhm.
Then you already know where it should go. But yeah, so I would look at this as, this is the content, everything that we would like to say to anybody, and then tailor it to where we want it to go.
Mhm.
Joe, is that where you are thinking, what you're thinking?
I wasn't making a point. I was asking a question
Okay.
because, I mean, I agree with the point. All communication starts with who you're sending it to and what you want their reaction to be,
Right.
rather than what your message is. And your message
Right.
gets shaped by who you're talking to and what you want them to do or how you want them to react. And as we started adding things, I was getting confused about what we're trying to do. Is it an apologia for ourselves? Is it something is there some insight here that we think we have that other people don't have that we're trying to share? Are we just doing a public mea culpa because we think everybody should do one? I'm not yet clear what reaction we're trying to get in what audience. And the more we talk, the more confused I got.
As I think about it, I think Joe's point is very well taken. I mean, we have to determine what it is that audience and what do we want them to hear. It's less about what we want to, well, I'll moderate this a bit. What we want to say is important, but the critical issue is, how do the people who hear it hear it? And so the language and the method that we use to communicate is going to have everything to do with how it's actually heard, which is the end point that I think is critical for all of us.
Mhm. I saw Mary Ann's hand up, and then Janice after Mary Ann.
You, to what extent is the audience our own parish community? Are we signing this St. Vincent de Paul parish community, or are we signing it our racial justice work group? Because part of the question is, if this represents the parish, do we then need to present it to the parish, town meeting, whatever? Because if this is going to go larger, should it not have the endorsement or some sort of attempt at consensus from the members of the parish? And I don't know how difficult that might be to get, but are we our small group, or are we St. Vincent de Paul Roman Catholic Church of Baltimore, as is stated in the letter? Just a question.
No,
But
it's a
I
very
think-
good question. And actually, that was one of the other areas that we needed to discuss tonight that we want to get to. So, you know, that's a good point. Peggy, did you want to say anything on that?
Our plan was to take the letter and the fund information to parish council and to let them decide if they want a town meeting, which we kind of assumed that they would. So.
Good. But it makes a difference in terms of not just Baltimore Sun versus Catholic Review versus whatever, but it's a different letter unto ourselves first.
Right.
Right. And I sort of saw it, to come back to Joe's very important point. If we were trying to just make a general statement to the community, a la the Bolton Hill Church letter, that's why I was thinking a few places, the Catholic Review being one, the Sun. But to be honest with you, not that many African Americans really read the Sun. and even fewer of us trusted it back, when it really was a strong newspaper for the African American community. The Sun did some terrible things, and most of us would rather have read the News American when it existed. And even today, there's still not the warm and fuzziest feelings about the Baltimore Sun and its coverage. And I don't know what their proportionality is on the staff or whatever, but so that's why I was thinking, to me, if you were going to try to talk to the whole community, you would see that the Afro-American had it. You would see that the Catholic Review had it. You would see that the Sun had it. Maybe there's some others that we would point out. That is, if our audience is this community at large, because I think Joe is right on point with to whom are we trying to communicate.
Mhm.
I think
And
Janet,
Dennis and Sharon, please don't
Yeah.
let me be, like the guru, because you may say, I didn't feel that way about the Sun at all. And your opinion is just as valid as mine.
Well,
Yeah.
I was going to suggest that if we do decide to go with the Sun, that we contact Dan Rodricks. I think if anybody can tell the story about what we've been doing and can do it in a cogent way, I think he would be the one to do it.
Great idea.
So, but I agree that before we do that, we have to get, it's got to go through a couple more layers of approval.
Yes.
But I think, I really respect the issues that he focuses on and that he champions. And, he wrote a very laudatory article about Dick. And, I think he has a sense of what the parish is trying to do.
But, I think that I was suggesting there are two questions. One is, to whom are you addressing the communication? And the second is, what kind of reaction what are you trying to get them to do or to react? How are you trying to get the audience to react? If our purpose is just to toot our own horn and we want people to think well of us, and that's one purpose, and you have one audience. If our purpose is to write this letter to the larger congregation of our community at St. Vincent's to try and recapitulate the journey that we have taken in order to try and bring our larger community to some of the realizations we have come to and to develop a consensus, that's a completely different document and a completely different reaction. So we have to not just say, where are we going to place it, but also, what are we trying to accomplish by putting this out there with what audience? What do we want them to react to? I had suggested, or was one of the people that suggested something that led to this sentence about recognizing that every white person is today, immediately, and in their immediate past, benefiting from the privilege accorded to them by a systemic oppression of people of color. That's a different realization than saying, let's go back and see if we had slaves at St. Vincent's, or if we had a balcony that was horrible in 1810. It's saying every one of us sitting here today, everybody on this Zoom call is right at this moment, and in the last week and in next week, the beneficiary of a systemic oppression of people of color. That's something that this group has come more and more explicitly aware of in our work. And not everyone that I know, in the people that I know in our congregation, not everybody I know in my own family is aware of that. And there is a frequent, dismissal of responsibility for action because my people weren't here when there was slavery. So it depends if we're talking about our congregation and what we're trying to do, I think that's a good place to start. Because if we're just a little committee of self-appointed activists, we can say anything. But if what we're trying to do is to be a force of change, let's first try to change the community that we're part of.
That's a good point.
Yeah, good points.
I want to say something. So I agree with that wholeheartedly. I also feel like as a group, I think we have seen the light as a group because we've read the books, we've learned about structural racism. And I think, and now we do want to do, make something happen. But other people in our parish may not know. But I don't know if our role is to teach them or our role is to say, okay, we acknowledge it and now we want to do something to make a difference. I feel like we want, in order to make a difference, we can't do it by ourselves because we're too small. We want to join with other churches, some other organization to make something effective that's going to help the economics of the Black community. That's what's so out of balance.
And I think it's important to recognize that there are people in our community that already are doing that as individuals as well.
Yeah. Marianne, did you have your hand up?
You're muted.
I think you're okay. Okay.
Mary Catherine.
I think we want to do both. I do think we want to, if there are people in our parish that don't really realize how much white privilege has given to us through the oppression of Black people. But I also think the bigger thing is, like, if we put it in with Don Roderick's, that it would get to other people, if it would have to be more concentrated. But also that we really want more people to think about the white privilege they have and the systemic racism. So that would be where we would get out to more people and hopefully get them to think about it a little more and what they then can do about it.
Jody?
I'm just wondering if you know, in terms of impact, if there are other teachers, that's my role. If there are other churches in Baltimore, in Maryland, that have focus groups like this also, that you could actually partner with a lot and maybe have a more significant impact on the Black community. Because you're right, a small group isn't going to have a lot of impact, even though it's positive, I would still do it. But I'm wondering if there are other groups, and I don't know, does anyone know that?
I think there are, Jody. I think St. Ignatius does. I think St. Matthew's does. I imagine there are others too. But
the Northwest one is meeting
yeah.
for months and months doing what we do.
But that's not the job right now, right?
Right,
Yeah.
possibly not, but I mean, just thinking in terms of impact, I guess it's just something to consider. Or maybe one of them has gone through the same struggle and has some, oh, well, this was good and this worked well, or whatever.
I've actually gone into some of their racial justice meetings in some of the other parishes, and they're not as far, I didn't think they were as far along as we were. And it also depends on if you're just talking about Catholics. There was a Lutheran one that was actually, they're way ahead of us. So I guess it depends on if we're just talking Catholic, if we want this to come. So it sounds like we need a lot more feedback from people, but we have a couple hands raised. I don't know if Sharon or Father raised first.
Doesn't matter. Let's go with Sharon and then Father.
Father Ray was first.
Okay. Father?
It really doesn't make any difference to me.
Okay.
Two things. Sharita is, I would hope, at this stage of the ball game, has her finger on the pulse of what's happening in terms of the various parishes, and if they're doing anything along the issue of racial justice. what they are doing and where they are. And perhaps thinking about her playing a role in terms of trying to coordinate. So every parish doesn't have to start from scratch, but we actually have the opportunity to share insights and perspectives that really empower all of us in terms of moving ahead. The other thing, just as a piece of information, we are having our priest convocation where the overwhelming majority of the priests will be going on a week retreat with the Archbishop. And they are having one of the focuses or foci, if you will, and I'm not familiar with this bishop, so I can't speak to him, but his focus is going to be on the issue of racism, and I'm assuming in relationship to the role that clergy need to play in regard to the issue of racism. So just a couple of points that may be useful.
We have Zoomed with Sharita, and she's having trouble just getting all the priests to buy in, much less the parishes. And she's also only part-time. And Bishop Lewandowski is going to be taking a more active role in, I don't have it in front of me, but there's a whole group of people for the racial justice. So we have tried, I lost Father there. We have tried to see if we can get something moving, but I think if something happens with the priest in this, whatever the meeting is they're having, that would be wonderful, because right now that seems to be where there's a big problem.
Well, I'll be honest, I've not heard from her at all.
Well, maybe this parish doesn't need it.
But I need it.
No, you don't.
Sharon, and I see Pat Ball also has a hand up. Or Sharon.
I would think that you're going to operate on more than one track, so to speak. You want to have to present this to the parish council and present it to the wider congregation of St. Vincent. In other words, you want them to hopefully, first of all, be aware and buy in and support. It also is, I think, correct to give everyone a wider group of St. Vincent a chance to speak, interpret, add, subtract, state how they feel about the entire initiative and what is stated in the letter or in the position piece. But once you have a position piece as to what you're declaring, then what do you do with it? Beyond just working with the greater St. Vincent parish, you want to do something for the benefit of marginalized people. I say marginalized people in Baltimore because at this point, it's more than just African Americans. I mean, African Americans historically have been around longer in the Baltimore area than anybody else, but that's not true today. There are a large number of people, Spanish-speaking people, who live in Baltimore and are facing the same challenges, if not more so, than the historical Black community. They just don't know how to operate in this whole environment because they haven't been here as long. Black people, for good or ill, have learned to a certain degree how to survive. Maybe not well, maybe not happily for sure, but hey, we're still here. So we've learned to survive. Hispanic speaking people are trying to learn the lessons if they've come from Mexico or Guatemala or El Salvador or wherever they are, because we have actually a community that is from many countries. They're still learning the lessons. So I think we're trying to help the marginalized community in general, and in the end, what do we want to do? I mean, basically, people need housing, they need healthcare, they need education, and one of the biggest things, largest things that we marginalized people have not had is the ability to begin to build wealth generation. And that's like having businesses in the community that are owned by local people. It's about having home ownership, which is appallingly low in the communities, in people of color, in the communities that are adjacent to St. Vincent or close to St. Vincent, and probably also throughout the city to a great degree. So I think you want to say something to the parish, your declaration of whatever we come up with, and then where do you want to take it? I think you go Baltimore Sun, you go to African American, and I love the idea of working with other churches. Pardon me, Father, but I would like the Catholic Church to step forward and be a leader in this, but I'm not seeing a lot of it right now. So if the Lutherans are doing better, that's okay. We can work with them. If whatever religious group, even if it's not Christian, if it's other, then whomever is trying to bring equity to the people of this city. That's a lot, but that's what I think.
No, it's not. Thank you. That was very insightful. You may have given us two directions that we need to focus on, one within the parish, and then work on the broader type of communication. So that would get us, we know, a 1-2 thing. Thank you. Pat had her hand up, and Jerry, I see your hand too. So Pat, are you there? And then Jerry Fiakowski.
Here, and I don't know what's wrong with my video, but I can't get it to work. So
Okay, hon, we can hear you.
We know what you look like.
yeah, thank you. I just wanted to go back to the idea that, yes, I think it needs to be presented to the parish, but somewhere along the line, people were talking about whether we needed to educate the parish. And I'm not sure that that can really happen the way it would need to happen. I'm not sure how it could happen. For one thing, this particular forum was well advertised, and this is the group of people that have chosen to be a part of it. And it has taken several months for us to come to the realizations that we've come to and the conclusions that we've come to. I'm not sure how we could do that with the whole parish, considering that everybody has had this opportunity. But I do think that obviously we have to let the parish know, and in the sense, let them know that we have been working on this for all these months, and these are the conclusions we've come to. And certainly we'd welcome their feedback and reactions to what the conclusions we have come to. And maybe that in itself would be educational for them, but I don't know that we could structurally put together like an education program. But we do need to let the parish know the fruits of our meetings.
Jerry?
Thanks, Pat.
Mhm.
I missed the last meeting, and so I got Peggy's letter yesterday, I think, and I read the letter. So the first thing that I thought of when I read the letter was what Joe McNeely said. I was wondering to whom this was going to be sent. The second thing that I thought was that if it was going to go to the Sun papers, I want to get back to the letter here, that it's probably too long for them to print it. The third thing that I thought was that overall, it's really excellent and it's a working document, but that means I think it needs to be, kind of dissected, and it gives it's a more than a skeleton. It's a great piece of work, but I think it's going to need to be a flexible document that we can adapt to whomever we wish to read it. And so I said to myself, like, what would be 3 things that I would want this person to hear in this letter, either about us or, and when I read the acknowledgement, we acknowledge, I couldn't help but think we acknowledge and we repent. Because I think we need to take ownership over this, and we're getting this, but we don't got this yet. We're just still getting this, and that's why I think that's kind of a working document. So I really didn't have to say anything, because actually Joe sort of said what I was thinking, only he had a lot more clarity about it. But I think if we focus on the letter and we say this is a working document, and then we have some kind of discernment about to whom we want to send this to.
Mhm.
I think some of these other things will follow later about coordinating perhaps with other committees or other parishes. But I think it is really important that the fruits of your labors continue to be fertilized and more seeds thrown, and that we get some more clear discernment about the document that we do have. I think of it as a working document and not a finished piece, but I think it's got the goodies in it that we can do something with. That's it.
Thanks, Jerry. And that's a good point about we don't have to send the same letter to everybody. That's a good point. Serafina?
Yeah, I agree with Jerry, and I think I was saying that before, that if we had like, this should be the place where we say everything, and then we figure out what we say to different audiences. But I want to go back to Pat Ball for a minute. I think the parish really does need to be fully informed. I think Pat's right. This was the opportunity for education to participate in this group over time. So we can't recreate it, and we can't try to do another educational piece for the parish. I will say that if we put this document out as sort of the working document coming out of this group, one of 2 things will happen, or both will happen. One is we will get a reaction from people who were not involved. They will wake up and they'll pay attention, and they may react positively or negatively because they haven't been part of this, but it'll be a wake up. The other possibility is that we won't get a reaction other than people walk away. So I think that is what needs to be. Just putting it out to the parish in and of itself, I think if anybody's reading anything that goes in the newsletter or any other way of communicating, will get a reaction and will be a wake-up call.
Thanks, Jerry. And we did assume we were going to need a town meeting. Yeah, Al?
Well, what you can do when you put this out is you can put links into all of the sessions that we have recorded, and giving the topic of each thing, and say you were invited to participate. We understand that many of you couldn't, but this is the result of all of our discussions that have been recorded. And we invite you to go back in and look at things in any order that you wish. And if we have a priority, of stuff that should be addressed, and I think definitely our white prejudice one was numero uno. If we think we're prejudiced, because that is a tough nut for anybody to crack. And that is a main sentence in our thing that we were just talking about earlier, the change that was made, okay? So I think the educational process can be presented in such a way that we've been doing all this work. This is the result of our work. We want to get more involved in the discussion. Here is the blah, blah, blah that we've been going through. We recommend especially you look at this particular one or that particular one when we come up to discuss at the parish council and or the general parish meeting, okay?
Thanks, Al. I feel bad because Joe Cronin, we've had him on the agenda, and most of the other things we were going to talk about, we haven't been able to get to. So I'm looking for you now, Joe.
I see him. He's on the
Okay.
right-hand side.
So Joe, are you okay with September, or would you like, I hate moving you again. Joe McNeely was going to talk in September too about the context that he's made. Do you want to do it then, or, because I know this is a valuable discussion, so.
Yeah, I mean, what Joe and I, have been doing is of a piece, so we tried to pull together principles, on which to proceed. And then, various people have proceeded. And so, we can talk about that in September. That's fine.
Okay. Peggy, can I kind of summarize what I think I've been hearing everybody say tonight?
I want to say something.
One, that this is too valuable a piece of work to rush. And two, what I've picked up from this is that thanks to Joe McNeely, we really, and then to others who supported him, we really do need to construct some specifically directed messages, and at least at first, to make sure that we have some form of awareness to the parish, something that speaks to the parish, and with all the cautions and caveats and everything else that others have raised, that we do make that effort to let the parish know who we are, what we've been doing, what we've concluded, maybe where we would like to go with their approval and jumping on board. And then secondly, to look at the other communities, as Sharon brought out and others did, that we really want to share our journey with, and especially with those who are taking the journey themselves and are learning, as she said, how do you survive it and how do you cope? And so I see two different, at least to begin with, let's deal with the parish. And then we can be working on how do we make that broader outreach, and especially taking into account the things we've heard tonight. The other thing I want to suggest is, this is why we need all of us. Just listening to this discussion tonight, I think we've all come such a long way because of our study and conversation, and how openly we can talk with one another, and how much consensus we have. But that's why I think maybe we really need, again, not to just have Peggy and me sort of listening and taking the notes and following, but a small team who would be saying, we're willing to tackle how do we really come across in a positive and complete way with the parish. And another group that said, we're willing to kind of discuss some more and tackle some more what we're really trying to do with the community, and what that community is, who are the people in that community, the church, the other dispossessed people and all of that. So what do you think of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Mary wanted to say something.
Yeah, I agree. I think if we're all in general consensus about everything that's been said, I don't think there's any disagreement. There are so many of us that if there could be a group of 5 or 6 people to boil it down to exactly what it's going to be and where it's going to go.
Thank you.
That's all.
I think there's an identity question we have to address, because we glibly use the plural first person we in this letter. And when I think about what we are, the we that I experience is we're a group of 20 to 30 people in a voluntary study group. We're like a big book club. And we have invested a great deal of time for every one of us, talent and resources of a small group of us that have taken an incredible leadership role. And we have established among ourselves, as Skip just said, a kind of mutual trust where we can share our learning and our ignorance and our growth. We are not an initiative. We are not an action group. We are coming to the awareness that one of the ways of addressing the systemic racism is to take action. But I don't think we've even plumbed whether we, all the people that have been coming to this, are willing to be an action group. And so before we jump to that, I think there's a preliminary step here. And then that evolves into whether we're an action group of 30 people that are just a self-appointed action group that can take action, or whether we're an action group within a community of St. Vincent's that is an initiative of that. Those are the questions that rattle around. But I think with this letter, and with the discussion and the exploration that Joe and I are doing, that Peggy refers to, and other people have been doing, is nibbling at this question of whether we're an action group. But that's a decision step, to go from being a book club to being an action group, or to being a self-education group in understanding our own awareness. I think that's worth being a step, a moment in itself within the life of this small community of 20 to 30 people.
Thanks, Joe.
And we started out as a much larger group that has been growing smaller. Now, maybe some people are away, but the numbers have diminished.
Yeah.
Over the months.
Jerry Filkowski, you had your hand up for a while. That's an old hand. Okay, Father, you're muted.
Father, unmute.
That,
Okay.
that was one of the reasons what was just said is one of the reasons why I focused the prayer at the beginning in the direction that I did, because there is this tendency on our part to, when something of significance happens, we all get fired up. And there's just this process that happens all too often, where as time goes by, the issue tends to fade to some degree in the public arena, and then it begins to fade in the arena of the given individual. I think that's just part of the reality of the world that we live in, and we've got to find a way to how do you keep an issue that should never become a back burner issue, an issue that should always have a central focus because of the impact that it has? How do we keep it in front of everyone? And also, how do we keep people from becoming tired? Okay. There has to be some sustenance for us as we address an issue that's been a part of this country for hundreds of years. And I think we would be naive to believe it's going to be changed tomorrow morning when you and I wake up. So we need some kind of way to sustain us, to nurture us in the face of the difficulties, that the difficult reality that this is going to take time.
Thank you, Father. So, Skip, do you want to give any final thoughts? I guess we'd like to hear from all of you with your specific ideas, and whoever would want to volunteer for some of these subgroups.
Yeah, we really do need more minds than just our own to work on these things. And this was, to me, a fantastic meeting. I mean, it brought up nuances that we really have to consider if we're not just going to crash and burn. So this was a very, very, very important meeting. And for me, the big lesson is let's slow down and do it right.
Peggy, may I, do you have another business question?
No, I just looked at the clock, and I didn't think I could keep you guys past 8:30.
I wanted to tell
other questions, but I don't think we'll address them tonight.
I wanted to tell a little story as perhaps a closing prayer that might respond to what Father Ray was just talking about and where we might get energy.
Okay, and do you
I
mind?
have a new need. May I?
I said yes, but do you mind if I do a prayer after that?
Yes, no. So I have a new neighbor across the street. He's a young man. He's incredible, amazing human being. But he grew up in West Virginia, and his grandmother is 96 years old. And his grandmother lived her entire life in West Virginia, very evangelical, right-wing Christian environment. And my neighbor is gay, and his grandmother has been totally supportive of him. Well, about a month ago, 3 weeks ago, he was called to West Virginia because his 96-year-old grandmother, they thought, was dying. She had had a heart attack. She was on life support, renal failure, complete renal failure. And he was there to be with her. And long story short, one evening she had so much anxiety, and she was on obviously a lot of oxygen, et cetera. And so he asked that they give her something to calm her so she might sleep at least and not be anxious. So they gave her a Xanax. The next morning, she woke up and all of her vitals went back to normal. They were able to take her oxygen mask off. And the first words out of her mouth were, "Oh, poor George Floyd."
Oh.
Yeah. Mm,
It was pretty stunning.
I'll say.
So that should give us energy
Yeah.
for continuing the fight. If a 96-year-old white woman is revitalized by knowing what it's like to be suffocated.
And I have some words from Dr. King also that hopefully will keep us also in the battle. So for our ending prayer, these were some words from his jail cell. More and more, I feel that the people of ill will have used time much more effectively than the people of goodwill. We will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the hateful words and actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence of the good people. Human progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts of men and women, willing to be co-workers with God. And without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the forces of social stagnation. We must use time creatively in the knowledge that the time is always ripe to do right. So we pray, dear God, help us to do right. Amen.
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 Thank you all so much.
Thanks, Peggy. That was great.
Yeah.
And if you all could just let us know if you would be willing to work in a subcommittee and your thoughts on who our audience should be even if it's several different audiences, we can change it. I think that's what we would be looking for right now. Skip, is that?
All right. And if we're going to really look at how do we approach our parish to update them on who we are, what we've been doing, maybe where we would like to go. And then if another group of you would be willing to get more deeply involved in this discussion about what do we want to say to a community at large and what groups are involved in that community at large. This was unbelievable, and that's why we really need your minds and your wisdom on all of this. Thank you.
We've tried to make some inroads with some other churches and offered them our recordings, and I'll tell you, there aren't a lot of takers out there. So,
can I tell a little story too, Peggy? I debated because I don't want to demean people, but I really don't think many, especially Catholic churches, are moving at the rate we're moving. One example is my dentist and his wife attend St. Francis Xavier. And one of the places Peggy's visited was St. Francis to talk to the pastor there. I mentioned that to my dentist's wife, and she said, "Oh, really, that's interesting." And she mentioned that the previous Sunday, a couple from St. Ignatius had come.
Excuse me a second, Skip. Do you want me to take this off recording?
Oh, God, yeah.
Go on. Save that thought.